Generation, and she has a couple of books. Her books, We Fought at Gettysburg, and she has a new one coming out very shortly on Cornelia Hancock's Civil War. And Carolyn, it's all yours.
Thanks, Phil. Thank you, everybody, for coming tonight. We are so grateful to see everyone. I see friends from many states here, and it's a real pleasure to be with our roundtable tonight. Phil, and we all know this story, but maybe other people from other states. We had a really hard time for a while. COVID killed off a lot of the roundtables in Connecticut. I think out of six, and the guys will correct me if I'm wrong, out of six roundtables in our small state, there are two left. And our roundtable, Housatonic, combined with South Central Connecticut, and that's why we're here today and very grateful. And there is Shoreline. If you've encountered any of their programs, they are still left. So only two out of six. So we're so happy to have you attend tonight, and hopefully you will find the program enjoyable. This program is a little offbeat. It's not. It takes place. There's just about everything for me in it. There's a little Connecticut, and there's a little medical, and there's a little Lincoln, and there's some firsthand accounts. But this program is based on an old story, and some of us old timers might kind of remember this story. It's about the reporter that President Lincoln kissed. And so it's about a guy named Henry E. Wing. And in 1864, during the Wilderness Campaign, he was a war correspondent, and he would risk his life to carry a personal message from General Grant to President Lincoln. He was a 25-year-old former flag bearer from the 27th Connecticut, and he was so badly wounded at Fredericksburg that he was discharged for disability. And he carried those disabilities for his entire life. And after his wounding, I guess the Army was done with Henry Wing, but Henry Wing was not done with the Army and would prove that pretty quickly after his recovery. This is, something didn't work right, Carolyn. Okay, there it is. So there were three sources plus a number of newspapers involved with the research for this. And the story is pretty well documented. Reverend Henry Wing, former wounded 27th Connecticut flag bearer and Civil War correspondent, in his retirement would move to West Reading, Connecticut in the early 1900s. He left his ministry. He was retired. He only preached part-time in his retirement. He was a Methodist minister, and he preached at a lot of churches in our area in Naugatuck Valley and Fairfield County. And in his retirement, he wrote two short memoirs of his Civil War correspondent experiences. One was When Lincoln Kissed Me, and the other was My Horse, Jessie. And we're going to tell a little about those stories. Now, there was a third book about him, and the great muckraking journalist Ida Tarbell, who took on Standard Oil, if some of you might remember that, she wrote extensively about Abraham Lincoln as well. She wrote a four-volume biography of Lincoln, and she knew who Henry Wing was. Well, she bought a house in Easton, Connecticut, one town over from Henry's Reading, Connecticut, and they knew each other. And she interviewed him many times. They would get together, and she decided that she would write a book called Reporter for Lincoln, and you can see that all the way over on the right. And the book is based on her interviews with Henry, some firsthand accounts, a lot of her research with Abraham Lincoln. Unfortunately, Henry died in 1925, just before the book was published, and he was pretty sharp right until the end. And I also used a lot of newspapers, newspapers.com, and the Library of Congress's Chronicling America, and to determine. I'm sometimes skeptical about when people write about themselves, but the story was very well documented in all the resources. So I hope you enjoy this little jaunt through the last year of the war. Now, Henry Wing was born in Dutchess County in New York in 1839, and soon after the family moved to Connecticut, and Connecticut was his state from a very young age. Now, Henry's father was Reverend Ebenezer Wing, and Henry says he was a good man, but his son described him as harsh, like his name. Needless to say, neither Henry nor his father ever saw eye to eye, and there was a lot of conflict in the family. And Henry would say later in life, when he talked about his father, truth was there was never any sympathy or understanding between us. And Henry remembered, these are his words, he thought I was not a good boy. He never liked me. My mother liked me better. That was good for Henry. And Henry says, when I was 15 years old, my father turned me out to earn my own living. So 15 years old, he's put out of the house. Again, a lot of conflict there. And my father said nothing but work would ever make a man of me. So Henry goes out on his own at 15, and it turns out one of the big conflicts between them was Ebenezer Wing was a very dedicated abolitionist. I'd almost say a vicious abolitionist. And Henry, whether to be contrary or whether he just was not part of that, was more of a union man. And this was a big conflict between them. Oddly enough, Henry would go to teach school at a seminary in Vermont in his later teenage years. And even though he didn't think much of slavery as being the evil that it really was, and his father's bitter attitude really forced him into the opposite camp. One of the young boys that worked at the school was a young black teenager who was obviously an escaped slave. And Henry knew this. Henry liked the boy. And it came to be found out that the young man's owner was after him, was searching for him. And these are the years of the Fugitive Slave Act, where, this act turned every citizen in America into a slave hunter. It was your sworn American duty to turn over any knowledge you had about escaped slaves. And Henry just didn't do this. In fact, Henry used his own salary to help the boy get away and get away to Canada. And afterwards, this really bothered him because the law stated he must comply and pass over any information he had, but he just couldn't do it. And his conscience bothered him, but then he had to admit to himself that, you know what, I would do the same thing again. I would protect somebody again, despite what the law said. So he does make his way back to Connecticut, 1860. And believe it or not, because his father is such an ardent Lincoln man, Henry says, well, I'm not voting for Lincoln. So you can see the two are constantly butting heads. When the war breaks out, Henry, who is a really excellent speaker and an excellent writer, starts to go around the state and give speeches to, encourage recruitment. He doesn't volunteer himself until 1862, but the catalyst for this is he and his father are both speaking up in Goshen, Connecticut, and Henry gives a rah, rah, excellent speech. He gets all kinds of accolades for the speech, but his father is also on the speaking stand. And Henry appeals to the men of Connecticut that the war is not a war of slavery, it is a war of union. And Ebenezer Wing is just so infuriated by this that when it's his turn to mount the podium, Ebenezer Wing just is just wild. And let me see if I can locate his words. He says, Henry says, this was a huge affair. A lot of speakers, a lot of fanfare, there's a band. And when his father finally got up, he starts to shout at the crowd. And Ebenezer Wing shouts, "Who would have thought that Ebenezer Wing would have come to this disgrace, to be compelled to listen to such brutal sentiments from the miscreant bearing his own name?" Well, Henry was sitting next to his mother after his speech, and his mother just turned to him and said, "Henry, there is a train to South Norwalk coming through. I think you had better take it." And so he does. And his father never really forgave him for this speech. But so that's a little bit about his boyhood, the things that form him. And Henry vows that he will also enlist. And he goes to the recruiting station September 2nd, 1862, and he enlists in Company Company C, the 27th Connecticut. 60 years after his enlistment, Henry is going to write how proud he was. I was very proud when at the start I was chosen as one of the 12 boys in the color guard. We took it awfully seriously. We swore we would die before our flag should be taken. You haven't any idea what a holy thing that was to us. And I guess I felt about that flag, about as my father seemed to feel about the family Bible. So to Henry, this is a holy undertaking to protect the flag, and the flag is an unholy object that must be protected with his life. And they don't see any combat until December. And at December 13th, you see the Battle of Fredericksburg, or the Fredericksburg Massacre, as some of the Union regiments are going to refer to it. And I'm going to use Henry's firsthand words for some of this. Henry says, "It's not until December that we saw any real fighting, and that was at Fredericksburg. Our regiment was in Hancock's division, and they sent us across the river right under the heights. We had been down in that country long enough for every man to know that those bluffs were stuck full of Confederate cannon and rifle pits, and that if they ever opened fire," and he quotes Longstreet, "a chicken couldn't live on that field. But when Hancock came around the evening before the attack and told us we were to be ready to go out in the morning, we cheered and cheered him. It was awful cold that night. We huddled together, talked a little, and we fellows in the color guard got together and swore again that we would never let the flag be taken as long as any of us were alive. That is what we thought most about keeping the flag. So it's early in the morning when we went in. We were mighty proud of ourselves for about a minute. The Confederates let us come on until we got to the very heights. And when we started up, they opened fire on us, and I went down, and we all went down like wheat does under a scythe, hardly a head standing. I was hit pretty quick in the leg. I guess I didn't know much for a time. When I came to, I raised up and looked for the flag. I could see it going down, coming up, going down, coming up. Now, Henry is going to be shot 3 times. He's shot in the leg, he's shot in the arm, and he's shot in the hand. And he recalled, I could not see the flag anymore, and I began to worry about it. I had to be sure that our boys still had it, and I started to crawl where I thought it might be. And then I got hit again, this time in the arm, and then again in the hand. After a little, I crawled on again and I found the flag, and I found some more of our boys dead, and there were 10 killed there where I was. I don't remember much what happened after I found the flag. Well, what happens is Henry is laying unconscious on the field, and a truce is declared on both sides so that the dead could be buried and the wounded picked up from the field. And Henry is going to be one of those wounded, and he may have been taken to Chatham across the river, which was a large Union Second Corps field hospital. Here are 2 wartime photographs of that beautiful house that becomes a hospital. And when Henry finally became conscious, he found himself laying on top of a piano that was being used as an operating table. The doctors were all around him preparing to amputate. And in Henry's words again, the next thing I knew, I was lying on top of a piano. There were doctors beside me, and they had made a mark on my leg and another around my arm. And when I saw they meant to cut off my leg and my arm, it made me mad. And I began to curse at them. They just took me off the piano and threw me out on the grass. You couldn't blame them. There were 12 doctors for 1,500 wounded men, and they couldn't have patience fighting them. They didn't think I would live anyway. Now, Henry's memory of waking up on a piano, I was like, how possible is this? Well, I found several instances of pianos being used as operating tables. And one of them was at Chancellorsville in May 1863. And 14-year-old Sue Chancellor remembered her words. The house was full of wounded. They had taken our sitting room as an operating room, and our piano served as an amputating table. The surgeons brought my mother a bottle of whiskey and told her she must take some, and so must we all. We all did. Upstairs, they were bringing in the wounded, and we could hear their screams of pain. Well, never mind a bottle of whiskey, probably needed a crate of whiskey after that experience, and then the house burned down. So that family had a terrible time. And the other famous story I found was the William T. Smith House at the Battle of Aversboro in North Carolina, and a baby grand was used for surgeries. That house is still there, so if you go to that battlefield, you'll be able to see it, although the house is in private hands. So this is the scene of what Henry would have witnessed from the wounded side of things. And this is the Chatham house, the Lacey house, or Chatham again at Fredericksburg. And this is more Kunstler's painting called The Angel of the Battlefield. And you see Clara Barton there in the foreground ministering to the wounded. And if you look a little over to the right, you're going to see an old man with a soldier in his arms. That is Walt Whitman. And so he is painted there too. They were both there. Dr. Mary Walker was there at this house in 1862. So this is the kind of scene that Henry would have been part of. Well, let's go back to Henry again. Henry recalled, it was Friday morning that they threw me out into the grass, and it was not until Sunday night they got me to Lookout Hospital. Now, Point Lookout, Maryland, you see is a large peninsula there. The back toward the back of the peninsula. That was the largest POW camp in the North. And you can see the hospital, Hammond Hospital, 1,400 beds is in the front. It's like the spokes of a wheel around the central hub of the hospital. So this is where they take Henry. And Henry's words again, Henry remembered at Lookout Hospital, the doctor came around and looked at me and went by. He didn't say anything. Then a sister of charity came and asked me if she should get me a priest. And I said, no, I was not a Catholic. And then she said, shall I get you a minister? I said, sister, does this mean that you think I am going to die? Yes, she said, you cannot live overnight. Henry said, I am not going to die. Before I left home, my mother read the 91st Psalm. 1,000 shall fall at thy side and 10,000 at thy right hand, but it shall not come nigh thee. You are coming back, Henry, my mother said. And so I asked, sister, you don't suppose that I am going to die after that, do you? Well, Sister Antoine, as they called her, and it made an impression on her what I said. So she sent one of her aides, Sister Mary, to take care of me. Sister Mary was young and pretty, and she looked at my fingers and cut the two of them off with her scissor and picked all of the proud flesh out of my wounds. And day and night for a week, she sat there with me, flushing my wounds out with tepid water and Castile soap, and every now and then giving me a few crumbs of bread and wine. I began to get better. She was the first girl I ever wanted to marry. I told Sister Antoine so, and she said, no, it could not be. Sister Mary was the bride of Christ. But I thought about Sister Mary for a long, long time. They finally dismissed me in March on crutches, and of course, that was the last of me as a soldier. Now, I want to look at this picture of Sister Mary, presumably with Henry. This is the first time I ever tried Chat GPT. I used 2 images in this program, probably won't do it again. But there are some problems with this. First of all, it couldn't understand that Henry's left hand, not his right hand, was wounded. And the other thing is, I tried to do Wounded Henry on top of the piano, but Chat GPT said no, it violated all of their standards. So I have no idea why, but so this is what I came up with, and at least you see some kind of a depiction of him. So what about Henry? Goes home, he's disabled, he's discharged. The army is done with Henry Wing, but Henry Wing is not done with the army or with the war. Now, he was a good writer and he was a good speaker. And he gets home and he starts writing patriotic editorials, and they're very good. And they come to the attention of Horace Greeley, the owner and editor of the New York Tribune. And he notices them and he says to Henry, I have a job for you. I want you to join the staff of the Tribune, and I'm going to put you in my New York office. Well, Henry likes this idea, but New York is too far away from the army for Henry. So he wants a place in the Washington Bureau, and he gets it. And at first, he is going to become the Senate reporter for the Tribune. He's assigned as the Senate reporter, and he joins other famous war correspondents or Tribune correspondents, newspaper correspondents. This is the Bohemian Brigade. And these guys, you're going to recognize a couple of them, I'm sure. This Bohemian Brigade of Civil War reporters were very colorful. They were rough, rowdy, courageous. They were very competitive. They were occasionally accurate in the the news. But of course, they want to sell newspapers, so that's not always the most positive part of the news. The Tribune has some of the best men. And these guys go to the front lines, and they are going to draft the first instance of history through the newspaper coverage that they write. These men really are the cutting edge, the modern battlefield and combat correspondents. They're brave, they're hard bitten, they're cynical. They bring the smoke and the gore of the battlefield back home. And at 25, Henry Wing is going to be the youngest member of the crew. These men viewed themselves as a band of unconventional, adventurous writers, just like the bohemian artists of Paris, whose name they adopted. Now, newspapers are booming. More Americans are writing letters than ever before in American history. More Americans are getting their news from ever before in American history. Everybody is wild about the newspapers. Everybody wants a newspaper. And Henry comes to the Washington Bureau in March of 1864. And in March of 1864, Grant is in command. They're preparing the army is still in winter quarters at Brandy Station. They're preparing for the overland campaign. And reporters are not necessarily popular men. They are pretty much at war with the War Department, with many of the generals. A lot of their coverage leaked secrets, it leaked troop movements, and a lot of the papers are, how shall I say, sensationalizing the news. They're inaccurate, they're partisan, they're biased. What else is new? And they ruin a lot of reputations. And we all know this. Grant is a drunk and Sherman is insane. And Secretary of War Stanton has just had it with war correspondents. He wants them totally banned from the armies. And so he issues an order banning all civilians from the front. And this is not a happy time for reporters. And it's not a happy time for Henry because he wants a coveted spot as an official correspondent. And it's going to be very difficult to achieve this with this Secretary of War's order. Well, Henry decides that he's going to disobey the order. He's going to take grave chances. He wants a scoop. And he probably has a good chance with it, with many of these reporters being banned. So he, despite the dangers, despite Secretary of War Stanton's orders, Henry dares to defy the blockade against correspondence. And he takes off on this very hazardous 48-hour jaunt of some 60 miles. And he's on the field between Union and Confederate pickets. He knows he's what he calls an uncredited trespasser. If caught, he would be arrested for spying by either side, not to mention just being shot outright. But he comes back with some great news, and he wires his editor at the front, his chief, who really appreciates his valor and is not adverse to disobedience to orders if it means news. And Henry comes back with the news. And with this in hand, the chief of the Bureau secures Henry an official appointment as a war correspondent assigned to the Army of the Potomac, just where Henry wants to be, and he's on his way to a brand new career. Now, the story of Henry's exploits and daring really spreads throughout the Army of the Potomac. Henry's a noticeable person. He's got a terrible limp. He's missing fingers. The story of his service with the 27th Connecticut sets Henry apart as a different kind of war correspondent among officers and men, and even with many generals. He's visibly wounded. He had faced what these men faced. He had survived. He was considered a cripple. There's no political correctness in the 19th century. He's crippled. And he's admired for it because he continues service where he's fit for service. And he continues to face the same dangers the Army did. And sometimes it seemed that Henry was oblivious to danger. He went where the action was, whatever the risk. He had a quick eye, a quick ear. He saw and heard official gestures. He understood orders that were never intended for reporters. He made connections and he acted upon them. His daily adventures into dangerous places and his escapes amazed his colleagues, and they start to say it's Wing's luck. And it's not really luck at all, except it's unusual courage, quick wit, and he's pretty daring. He made friends wherever he went, and Henry is really trusted by many people. This group of men you see here, the man in the center is Captain Milton Kline. He is Meade's chief of scouts, the Bureau of Military Intelligence. These scouts are all around him. Henry knew Kline well. He knew these men well. He knew many of the staff officers at Meade's headquarters, and they knew him as well. And of course, there is a trust factor there. Henry really makes a lot of connections, which are very, very useful. Well, this collection with Captain Kline is extremely useful because Henry is at the Army at Meade's headquarters on a morning in early April 1864 when Captain Kline, chief of the Army Scouts, strolls past him, and he gives Henry a subtle but unmistakable sign to follow him. And so Wing recalls that I did follow him to his camp, and he pointed to a horse. And Henry's words, now let me just tell you the importance of a horse to a war correspondent. They needed a good horse badly, or they could not be successful. So Henry's words, he points to a horse, and this extraordinary horse was a bright chestnut gelding, just past 7 years, with one white fetlock and one perfect star in his broad, bony face. He was without scar or blemish, with a deep, full chest and a short, round barrel, with muscles of iron and sinews of steel. I had a sort of personal acquaintance with every best horse in that army. I'm sure he did because he needed the best he could get. But here was a better one. Captain Kline led me to the hospital and directed me to a cot by which sat a long-limbed, large-featured, handsome Confederate, the horse's former owner. The horse's name was Jesse, and he was a Kentucky thoroughbred. And so Jesse becomes Henry Wing's trusted partner. And obviously, the horse is one of the spoils of war. And, to the victor belong the spoils, and Henry and Jesse become inseparable for a time. Now, the overland campaign begins from Culpeper early in the morning of May 4th, 1864, when the Army of the Potomac crosses the Rapidan. A week before the campaign began, President Lincoln wrote to General Grant, "The particulars of your plan I neither know nor seek to know." So he's giving Grant free rein. He's not going to check up on him. Grant orders to General Meade during the campaign were, "The objective of this campaign is Lee's army. Where he goes, you will go also." The immediate undertaking was to get the Union Army of more than 100,000 men across the Rapidan River and through the wilderness into open country before Lee could intercept it. But, Lee's no fool, and he sees the chance here and he attacks the Federal Army in the wilderness. Now, I know you all know what the wilderness is. It's this dense second growth forest, scrub oak, pine, briars. It makes movement and visibility extremely difficult. It's almost impenetrable. It's tangled undergrowth, limited clearings, forbidden. And its location is just west of Fredericksburg in Spotsylvania County. And this is going to lead to some of the most brutal close quarter fighting of the war. And during the combat, the tangled undergrowth is going to catch fire and it's going to incinerate the wounded, the dead, and any who are caught in it. And Lee uses every advantage to hinder the Army of the Potomac. And for several days after the fighting, there is no intelligence, no news to Washington. No one in the capital city knows where the Army is or what is happening to the Army. So at 25, this young correspondent for the Tribune, Henry Wing, is determined to get a dispatch to Washington. He goes to Grant's headquarters in the field, and he tells Grant he's willing to risk travel through enemy territory to the capital. Henry asks the general for some remarks for the public in the North to insert into his dispatches, and Grant just tells him in front of others, "Oh, well, yes, you may tell the public that things are going very well." Henry knew it was evasive and misleading, but very respectfully writes the general's words into his notebook, and he respectfully thanks the general and begins to step away, takes a step or two, and then suddenly Grant is walking with him out of the hearing of others. And he tells Henry, "If you get through and you see the president, tell Mr. Lincoln from me that whatever happens, there will be no turning back." And then Grant shook Henry's hand and returns to his officers. Now, Henry Wing has this plan. He devises a plan. How is he going to get through? He's going to disguise himself as a Southern sympathizer who, if he's intercepted, and he will be, he knows he will carry news that General Lee is winning the fight across country. And with this story and his swift thoroughbred, Henry believes that he could evade or outrun any pursuers. So he prepares to depart. He burns all of his papers. He coddles Jesse. He feeds him. He gets rid of his elegant reporter clothes. The Tribune expected its correspondents to dress very well. His kid leather gloves, his buckskin jacket, his imported French corduroy pants, his boots. He ditches it all. And he gets this beaten down, coarse woven butternut suit. Puts on a pair of cheap brogans, ties up his pants with twine, he's really looking downtrodden. And he sets out. Now, he gets about 8 miles, only 8 miles toward the Rappahannock River when he encounters a group of gray cavalry. They take a look at him and they wave him on. Further on, he encounters a troop of Mosby's Rangers. And Mosby's Rangers are like, "Hey, come over here, partner, talk to us. Let's see what's going on." And he gives them the big spiel about how he's just a poor plantation hand, and Lee's winning, and blah blah. Gives him the big 9 yard story, and they believe him. And they say to him, which isn't ideal, we're going to furnish you with an escort because you're one of ours. We don't want the federals scooping you up. And so they plod on and they arrive at Kelly's Ford. It should be a familiar name to many of you. He arrives at Kelly's Ford. Well, guess who's there? Old Man Kelly. Old Man Kelly's a one-armed, very bitter secessionist who had entertained Henry Lee. He knew Henry Lee. Henry Lee knew him. And immediately starts to shout at the cavalry, you know who this man is? He's this Yankee correspondent. Well, Henry just puts the spurs to his thoroughbred and he outruns them. And he gallops past the ford that he needs to take, just keeps galloping, and ultimately swims Jesse across the river with the cavalry firing shots. But Jesse helps him make good his escape. Well, this is the name of the game. He keeps encountering all of these Confederates. There's citizens and cavalry and marauding deserters, and they're all over, and he just can't make any good time. If he could put the spurs to Jesse, he could easily outrun anything, but time after time he's intercepted, and Mosby's Rangers are really on the lookout for him. Ultimately, because his progress is constantly interrupted, how long is his good story going to hold out? He finally decides that what he has to do is he has to hide Jesse. And he does. He gets a lead out. He finds a secluded area. And he ties Jesse on a lead, dumps out a bunch of oats, kisses the horse goodbye. He really loves this horse. And as he's leaving, he ducks down again because Mosby's Rangers gallop right past him. So he has to make his way north, and how he's going to do this, he's going to follow the rails. And he follows the rails. He has all kinds of close calls and adventures. He hides in swamps. He, lays in the mud. He hides in the brush. He finally let me give you his words. I crawled over the railroad and started my long tramps toward Washington. I frequently lay in the weeds and the grass amid the swamps, cruelly tormented by swarms of insects, and while search parties passed within sight of me. Took me over an hour to get around Warrenton Junction. At Rappahannock Station, scores of people are gathered, picking up and packing off the debris of the deserted Union camps. Here he was halted, and he was captured by someone he thought was one of Mosby's men. It turns out to be a federal soldier. He thought it was 69th New York. It was an Irishman with a very thick brogue who takes a shine to him, takes him back to camp, feeds him up, and then lets him escape while his partners, shoot after him. So he maintains this disguise of a southerner passing through. And then he gets caught at Manassas Junction. And the Southern officer in charge of the picket line does not believe him. Doesn't disbelieve him, but says, you're not going anywhere, buddy, until I get my commanding officer here. And so Henry knows he's in a real tight spot. So the first thing he does is he escapes. And he keeps running. He makes his way across the Bull Run River. And he crosses the Bull Run. And he makes his way after several other close shaves, to the trestle of the Orange and Alexandria Railroad, where you see here. And a Union picket, you see the picket line there, takes him in and brings him to the post headquarters at Union Mills. Now, for us in the Gettysburg area, this is not Union Mills, Maryland, right down the road from us here. This is Union Mills, Virginia, and this is a hub with a military telegraph, and you can see it there. Military telegraph, the train tracks. Maybe he was in that shack there by the telegraph pole. I don't know. So Henry makes it to Union territory. Now there's a problem. He cannot, as a civilian, use a military telegraph. The civilian telegraph is 20 miles away. Well, Henry always has a plan, and the new Assistant Secretary of War is Charles Dana, who was the bureau chief for the Tribune. Henry knows him very well. So he takes a chance, and he has the military telegrapher telegraph to Dana. I am just in from the front. Left Grant at 4 o'clock this morning. Well, the telegraph clicks and the message comes back, but it's not Dana on the other end. It's Secretary of War Stanton. And Stanton goes, "Where did you leave General Grant?" Well, Henry is like, "What? Nobody knows where Grant is?" Well, he realizes he has a hell of a scoop on his hands. And he responds to Stanton. This kid's got big ones, let me tell you. He responds, "If Mr. Stanton will let me send 100 words over the government line, I will tell you all I know." Well, Stanton goes up like a stick of dynamite, and he's enraged, and he says, "You are not going to use the military. You're going to give me that information." And Henry goes, "No, the information belongs to my newspaper." So Stanton's like, "That's it. You're a prisoner. I'm going to have you shot." You know, Stanton's really tantruming at this point. So they secure Henry. They put him on a cot next to the telegraph key. And these are his words. Henry again. Henry's fuming. Henry remembered, "I lay on a cot at the side of the room, furious. I was a disreputable, suspicious-looking figure, a slight figure, a boy, you might say. I was not more than 130 pounds. I was clad in rough butternut, the garb of a Virginia plantation hand. I was head to foot plastered with red Virginia mud. If you looked really close, you would have seen that 2 fingers were gone from my left hand, and I lay quiet enough. But no one could have imagined from my despairing relaxation the turmoil of disappointment and rage inside my heart and my head. I was sentenced to be shot in the morning, sentenced by the Secretary of War, who I heartily hated." Okay, so he's not in a good mood. Well, he's laying by the telegraph, and this is Wing's luck now. He hears the telegraph key begin to click, and he thinks to himself, "I bet you that's about me." And it certainly was. President Lincoln had gone to the telegraph office, as he often did, and he opened the drawer on the table where he sat, and he was used to look at all the telegraph messages. Well, the telegraph operator says, "Well, there's no news this morning, except a man came into Union Mills and claimed that he had left the Army early in the morning and wanted to talk to Mr. Dana, but Mr. Dana wasn't here. And so therefore the Secretary of War was and refused him the use of the wire to send a message. The fellow said he would not give the information to Secretary of War Stanton unless he was able to send a dispatch to his paper. The secretary says he is a spy and ordered him shot in the morning. So Lincoln has the key operators start clacking away. And the operator on Henry's end says, Mr. Lincoln wants to know if you will tell him where Grant is. This is the President of the United States. Henry goes, I repeated my offer first of sending a 100-word message to the Tribune. And the President did accept his offer. Henry sends his scoop out to the paper, and then he starts to give Lincoln the information he wants. Well, the key clicks back, and Lincoln advises Henry that there are 2 trains that will be coming to Union Mills. One engine is going to be carrying Assistant Secretary of War Dana, whom Henry will debrief with. That train will carry on to Grant's headquarters. The second train is coming, second engine is coming. Henry will get on that train and will be taken back to Washington. He is going to debrief not only President Lincoln, but the cabinet. So here's the cabinet. Now, Henry and the cabinet, Lincoln and the cabinet are waiting. Henry arrives. He had not stopped to change. And for the first time, he realizes how bad he looks, how very, very bad. And he actually is like looking over at the president, and, Lincoln's looking at him like, who the, whatever. But anyway, Secretary of the Navy, Gideon Wells, is a former Connecticut newspaper owner. He knows Henry. He vouches for Henry. He winds up introducing Henry as a constituent to the cabinet. Henry debriefs the president. The official briefing is over. And as the cabinet starts to leave, Henry says to President Lincoln, I have a message for you from President Grant. And here's Henry again. Lincoln stood, and Henry says, I never realized before how tall he was. I looked up into his impassive face, and I was ready to deliver Grant's message. He took a short, quick step toward me, and stooping down, the president said to me, what is it? I was so moved I could hardly stammer. General Grant told me to tell you from him that whatever happens, there is no turning back. And Mr. Lincoln was so moved to receive the general's message. He put his great strong arms about me and he kissed me on the forehead. And there you get the title, When Lincoln Kissed Me. So they sat down to him. Henry talked to the president for a little while. Henry did give the disheartening details about the Battle of the Wilderness and that there would be no turning back. And this would become the first of many private briefings that Henry and President Lincoln would have the last year of the war. Now, just want to take a little digression. Listen, Henry was going to go back for that horse. And he went back to see the president before departing for the front. And President Lincoln said to his bureau chief, he goes back with the bureau chief, I think your newspaper ought to do something nice for Henry. And, the bureau chief is joking around and says, oh, well, we're going to get him his horse back, And Lincoln's like, Lincoln loves dogs and Lincoln loves horses. There he is with his horse in front of the old soldiers' home in Washington. And Lincoln's immediately taken. He's going, what horse? And so Henry tells him he left Jesse behind and he's going back for him. Lincoln sends him back with a cavalry escort. So they mount the train with a cavalry escort. Henry will get Jesse back. And he will bring Jesse back with him to Washington. You see this newspaper article here. The Bohemian Brigade took up a collection. Henry got $50 from this collection as a little bit of a reward money. He got Jesse a new saddle. He got Jesse a new bridle. He brought Jesse to the White House, and President Lincoln was so taken with the horse, he actually rode Jesse around a couple of times. And Henry remembers this fondly. And before he leaves again for the front, Jesse, and this is all hindsight, Jesse said, Jesse, I keep calling Henry Jesse. Henry says, I really should have sent Jesse home to Connecticut. He was actually offered $1,000 for the horse, but he just couldn't bear to part with him. And so they both go south again, back to the army. And throughout that summer and the fall that follows, Henry Wing would always end his frequent returns to Washington with a quick visit to the White House. And he would show up at all times of the night or day. And always Lincoln's words to him were, "Show me where you have been, Henry." And they would look on the map. And this is my other chat GPT, image. And they would go through the map, and Henry would talk to the president. And Lincoln really felt he was getting some honest firsthand information. And so the relationship goes on. Now, Henry continues to serve as a war correspondent until the end of the war. His relationship with Lincoln will continue until the president's assassination. From the spring of 64 on, he's always welcome at the White House. He's back and forth between Grant's headquarters and Meade's headquarters and Washington. Sometimes Henry would serve as a scout. He would report dangerous situations to the command as they arose. He would expose himself to combat. He was even known to pick up a musket and fight when the situation called for it, as it did at Cold Harbor. And I have to tell you, Cold Harbor took so much out of this kid that he actually thought about just leaving and going home, but he did not. And he decided to stick it out. Now, he is thinking about the end of the war, what he's going to do at the end of the war, and he decides to buy himself a newspaper up in Litchfield, Connecticut, the Litchfield Inquirer. But instead of taking possession of the paper outright, he vows to see the end of the war. He's going to stick it out till the end, and continues to do so until he winds up at City Point, and he is going to have his last meeting with President Lincoln at City Point. We all know the president comes down from Washington on the River Queen to confer with Generals Grant and Sherman and Admiral Porter about the end of the war, which everybody knew was near. One day, Henry is hurrying out of the telegraph office, and he almost collides with Mr. Lincoln and his party. And Lincoln immediately calls out to him, Henry, how are you? We must have a talk." And he put his arm around Henry's shoulder, and he starts walking away from his group, and they walk a few paces down the road, and they're following the river. And Lincoln says to him, "Too many people here. Let's get into that boat." He sees this little skiff tied up, and he says, "Let's get in that boat." And so the president, gets in, Henry gets in, they row out a little ways into the stream, away from shore. And they allow the boat to drift. And Lincoln sits there and says, "And now tell me about things." What have you been doing? And this illustration is from Ida Tarbell's book about Henry and Lincoln. So this isn't a chat GPT, it's a watercolor that she used to illustrate her book. So that's their last meeting. Henry's determined, absolutely determined to be in at the finish. So he rides with the Federal Army until it halts outside of Appomattox. And we all know that on April 9th, there's a meeting arranged between Grant and Lee at the McLean House. And Henry arranges with a member of Grant's staff that if Lee does surrender inside the house, by the way, I don't know who this member of the staff is, but if Lee does surrender inside the house, this officer is going to come out. He's going to stand on the porch. He's going to take off his hat. He's going to wipe his forehead 3 times with his handkerchief. And then Henry will know and he will have the news of the surrender. So Henry, he's lolling around on horseback with the group. There's Confederate officers, there's correspondents, there's federal officers around the house. The officer that he has made the agreement with comes out onto the porch, wipes his forehead 3 times with the handkerchief, and Henry Wing is in the saddle and off with the news. He's determined to beat the correspondent of the New York Herald, and this is going to be his last wartime dispatch. April 9th, 1865. Well, Henry goes home to Connecticut, gets on the train after this, goes home to Connecticut, takes possession of his paper, and there's going to be a transition. The paper is published every Thursday. So the April 13th edition, when Henry gets home to Litchfield, announces his ownership and the transition of the paper from the old editor to the new editor. 2 days later, Henry is sitting at his desk at the Litchfield Inquirer on April 15th, 1865, and a young boy brings a telegram in and places it on Henry's desk. And the telegram says, Abraham Lincoln, President of the United States, assassinated last night in Ford's Theater, Washington, died this morning, 22 minutes past 7. And so Henry's first issue of the Litchfield Inquirer, put out on Thursday, April 20th, under his leadership, with all of the mourning banners on every page, with the news of the assassination and the search for John Wilkes Booth. I think Henry's heart was pretty heavy to bring out this first edition, mourning his friend, the president. Now, if you're interested in this, all of the issues of the Litchfield Inquirer are at the Chronicling America at the Library of Congress, and this is the actual issue that you see here that I took from Chronicling America. Now, we're almost done. Let me say a word about Jessie. Jessie, that beautiful horse, was the spoils of war for Henry. Well, Henry gets in a few terrible situations, and Jessie is going to become the spoils of war again to Confederate cavalry who capture him. But Henry Wing's luck, he eludes his pursuers and makes his way safely back. So, to the victor go the spoils, and Henry was pretty lucky to escape so many times safely. Now, just in conclusion, I want to talk a little about Henry. This is him in 1878. He's kind of got a Sickles thing going with his mustache there. That's all I could think of. But this is him in 1878. And let's go back a little. In September 1863, after he's wounded at Fredericksburg, discharged and sent home, Henry got married. And he married Vida Nash from Norwalk, Connecticut. Now, Connecticut's a small state, and Vida Nash is a Colonel Douglas Fowler of 17th Connecticut fame. It's her brother-in-law. And of course, Vida's sister died in childbirth. And in July, that July 1863 at Gettysburg, of course, Colonel Fowler is going to be killed. But Henry marries his sister-in-law. So that's just a little tidbit about how small Connecticut really is. Henry, they're all buried in Norwalk except for Colonel Fowler, who's probably in the National Cemetery here at Gettysburg. By 1874, Henry becomes an ordained minister. It was kind of the family profession. His father, his younger brother, and then he himself would become a Methodist minister. His bishop sends him out to Fairfield, Iowa. It is, even though it's in the north, it is a parish that split along the lines of slavery and unionism and the war. And the war has separated this parish, and it has not, it's 1874, it's 10 years later, and they want nothing to do with each other but their same parish. Oddly enough, Henry will be the reuniting factor, although you can read the quotes here. We have nothing against you, Brother Wing, but we do not want you. Well, here's Henry. I have nothing against you people either, and I do not want you, but you have got me, and I am stuck with you, so we must make the best of it. And they certainly did. He did bring the parish together. He built a beautiful Methodist church. You can see it up in the upper right-hand corner. It was beautiful. They called it Wing's Folly. It was ultimately replaced by a newer church, but Henry would come back to Connecticut to retire. That's where he met Ida Tarbell. He would continue to preach. He would continue to write. He wrote his 2 memoirs. By the way, if you're interested in these 2 memoirs, you can get them for free on archive.org. You can get the whole thing and read it on your computer. They're short. They're very entertaining. They're very interesting. So you can do that. And just before we leave, I'm going to show you this picture again, because this is my photographic epilogue. I look at a lot of pictures in the Library of Congress, and this is the picture, of course, with the group of scouts and Captain Klein in the middle. And there were 2 plates taken, two photographs taken of this group. One with this gentleman on the bottom left with a cigar in his right hand. You can see his cigar in his right hand there. And this is a clearer plate, but this is him with the cigar in his mouth. And here is Henry Wing. And as I looked at this picture, I'm like, wow, what an interesting picture. And I zeroed in to Henry Wing, and I looked at Henry Wing. I wish it was Henry Wing. I looked at his left hand, and he was missing fingers off his left hand. And I'm saying to myself, oh my God, could this be Henry Wing? I mean, there's some similarity in them. So I had to do a lot of research. This picture also appeared in Miller's Photographic History of the Civil War. Well, I will tell you, the captions and the names are wrong in Miller's, and they are also wrong in in the Library of Congress. So I did a lot of digging around, and I finally found out a genealogical web page run by this guy's family that his name is John Irby. He was with the 3rd Indiana Cavalry. He did lose fingers on his left hand at Brandy Station, not during the big Brandy Station cavalry battle, but a few days later. He got caught with some shrapnel, took his hand away. But I'm going to tell you what, when I was looking at this while I was doing this program, I was like, I've got to get to the bottom of this because that just might be Henry Wing. Well, it is not, but it was a good shot and it's a great photograph. And just a little word of warning, if you do a lot of photographic research for Civil War, captions, names, as in this case, the names were wrong. The names were wrong in both Library of Congress and Miller's photographic history. And so I must say too, and this is something that we delve into more now than we ever did. This man, his name was John Irby. He was so psychologically messed up by the war that he has a family, he has a farm, and in 1871, he hangs himself in his barn because he just was so ill and so anguished that he just ends his life. So, there's a little piece about the cost of war, the human cost of war, and not just for those who fight, but for the civilian populations and the families back home as well. And before we end, I want to do a little bit of shameless self-promotion. My book should be coming out, I'm hoping, fingers crossed, next month. It's about a Civil War nurse called Cornelia Hancock, and I'm really excited about it. There are over 200 photographs in the book of the people she writes about, what she sees. And with the book, I'm hoping that readers can literally enter Cornelia's world, the world of the Civil War, the world of the aftermath of Gettysburg, of Washington during the war, Washington, D.C. during the war, the Overland Campaign and City Point. And I'm really looking forward to it. And I hope that you will look for it and be interested in it. And thank you so much for all your time. I don't even know how long it was, but why don't we get back and maybe we can take some questions and I get to see all of you. And thank you so much. I hope you found that interesting. And I know I did, but I'm easy to entertain though.